to the Zveda podcast. I'm Jamie.
And I'm Lorena.
We're a community for women by women. We're here to help each other rise to impact generations. Hey ladies, welcome to the Zveda podcast. I'm Jamie.
And I'm Lorena.
And we are so excited to be with you again this week.
Yeah, we're super excited to jump into this next topic this week. Just a reminder of the kind of flow of our podcast is that we'll talk about something that's trending in our world today and how that applies to just us rising as women. And we'll tackle the main topic that we'll want to talk through. Then we'll give you a tip that's related to health and hospitality. And lastly, we'll answer some of the questions that have been coming through from the community.
I'm especially excited about the hospitality tip this week.
Yes, me too.
All right, let's dive right in. So what is trending this week? I think to just coincide with last week, we're stuck at home. Many of us are stuck at home and we're making the best of it. And I think what we really wanted to tackle this week is connection. So we're all seeing comments on Instagram and Facebook and social platforms that how do I stay connected in this time where I'm at home a lot more than I am used to being at home. And yeah. So what can you guys offer for me? I'm stuck here. What do I do? How do I connect?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting on that topic, you know, as we've been watching things develop so quickly with the coronavirus and how different nations are responding to that. I know just recently, Texas is going through having a lot of different restaurants and gyms, a lot of different organizations, schools even, be shut down for a few weeks and people are being quarantined in the midst of all of this. And one of the things that Jamie and I have been talking about, we were just chatting about this earlier today, sitting in her kitchen downstairs, as we were talking through how what's really beautiful in all of this is how it's being used to bring families together and to bring people in closer proximity virtually, even in that sense, using different digital platforms to foster these connections while, we're keeping our social distancing, or like my pastor was saying, it's like personal distancing. It's not like social, like we still need to be social. Right. We still need to connect.
It's so true. So yeah, I think, one of the things that we talked about today in church as well is just this time looking at it as a way to heal. I think there's some stats floating around. I did not look them up prior to the podcast, but I'm sure you can find them just by a simple Google request. But pollution is down. With traffic being down, people being indoors, pollution is down. The noise pollution is down. So it's kind of looking at the fact that spring is still here.
Yeah.
And outside is healing. Air is healing. Our land is healing. Here it's been raining in Austin, Texas. So spring rains are coming. And it's a great way to think about shifting our thought process, and that outside is healing and we inside are healing. It's giving us time to, I know for me personally, to rest, to connect with my 14-year-old son, to do some things that I've been putting off. Like listening to music and a lot more than normal.
Or jumping into a course that you've wanted to do recently. Yeah, I know for me, like it's been so restful to be like, I don't have to jump from this thing to this thing to this thing to this thing. I can just if I want to make breakfast for myself at home and just eat breakfast before I jump into my workday, I'm like, great. This is awesome. I don't have to drive, 20 or 30 minutes to get to the office, which I know some of you are probably like, that's her commute. I am very thankful to live close to downtown. But, on that line, like Jamie's saying, like there's so much healing happening, both, the world around us out, in the outside, but also a lot of healing happening in our hearts and in relationships and in our families. So that's really what we wanted to focus on, was just in the midst of all of this, prioritizing connection, as there's a lot of like healing and rejuvenation happening. And so we wanted to talk before we jump into the main section of our content. Now that things are being forced in a good way, for, communication and connection to happen over different digital platforms and to be virtual, like what are some of the things that, Jamie, that you've been seeing kind of pop up in the midst of all this?
Right. So I think one is, and I think this is fun, is companies are doing virtual happy hours.
Yeah. Where I work, we did one last week and it was a blast. Like people just like got in front of their screens. They brought together, if they had a glass of wine that they poured for themselves or a little mocktail, right? Where you've got some like sparkling water and some lime squeezed in there. And we all just chatted for about half an hour, 45 minutes. And it was great just to have that connection and it wasn't work related.
Yeah, I think another is virtual coffees with business contacts.
That's fun.
They don't have to stop. Our connection and our opportunities to meet and talk with people that we're trying to build relationship with, have a virtual coffee. Same as the concept as the virtual happy hour.
Yeah. One of the things that when I was talking about this with Jamie, I was like, all right, we can be super simple here. Like, call your mom.
I know.
Or call your dad, or like just someone in your family that you haven't talked to in a while, that you want to just check in on them and see how they're doing. Like just pick up the phone and just do a normal call. Like that can be so sweet and building connection that, may not be where you want it to be right now, or just to continue to, cause it to move forward.
Yeah, and I think from a church perspective, I know many churches aren't gathering. We can't right now. In the church building, but we're seeing church online and worship service online. I know our church is doing a noon prayer call every day, just
awesome.
A 30-minute call in, say some prayers for what's going on in our families and in our world. And that has provided, to be impactful, as well as Bible studies.
Yeah.
Women's Bible studies still gathering. Teens, youth groups are still gathering. I think that's so amazing because our teens, they need to be active and out too, and not just behind the screen, but this is just a different way to be behind the screen and connect with others that they go to school with or in youth group with. So I think that's very impactful. And from a work perspective, I know it's really helped us to gather online using various video chat platforms and to see each other's faces.
It's huge. Yeah.
It's important for communication when you're looking at someone versus just listening to the audio. So I would encourage you, if you have that opportunity with your teams, do a video call, not just an audio.
Yeah, that's good. I know we've been encouraging that same very thing in the company where I work at Mighty Citizen. And I remember one of our designers this past week, like her family is all home with her and her son, who's I think 4, he was sitting in her lap like for one of the calls. And just like that brought so much joy because it's like we're getting to see into like people's personal lives more, which just brings even more connection than if this wouldn't have even happened. Like it's God's using it. So it's fun.
Yes. So to put a pin in that one, what's trending? Definitely connection, finding new ways to connect in our virtual world. So good luck with that this week. All right, Lorena, let's dive into our main topic today. Woo-hoo. And it is another mindset that we want to bring forward. And I know Lorena is very passionate about this one. She actually brought this forward to me, so I'm sure she would love to kick this off. But the mindset being you are a producer.
Yeah, so I'll just lay this one out. Again, this was something that I learned through a conversation with a professor of mine from UT. It was right after I graduated because I was like really having a hard time finding what job I wanted to step into full time. I applied for many different full-time jobs, part-time jobs, internships, and just like the door was just not opening for a lot of those. And it was a struggle. It was very hard. And sitting down with this one professor, we were just talking, kind of hashing it out. And one of the parts of our conversation was actually him bringing up some themes along this mindset. And so I want to kind of lay it out there. So really this mindset is a shift from a consumer type attitude So being in the, culture we live in today, everything is all consumer based. Like we're constantly being hit with marketing messages of consuming this product, this service, and marketing is designed to do that because, right, like they're selling an idea, they're selling a service to make a profit. And so that's the purpose of marketing, but we're constantly being hit with that. And so as a product of our society, we have this huge consumer mindset where it's all about what experience can I get out of this? How can this product serve me and benefit me and make my life easier? So it's knowing that mindset. And a lot of times we can bring that mindset into the education sphere. So, for example, I remember when I was a student at UT, rightfully so, I was paying for my education and my parents were helping out for part of that. And so as a consumer, I got to define my experience. So, whether like different student activities that I wanted to be a part of and have access to different resources, career services, all those things. Because again, since I'm footing the bill, I'm paying for it. I have a right, in a way, to demand. I know it sounds like super prideful to say it in that way, but it's like the mindset is I get to demand what it is that I'm actually paying for because I'm resourcing the experience. Well, the thing that I was talking about with this professor is that once you shift out of that, especially in the education sphere, going to a public institution or a private school, when you shift then into the workplace, you then are not a consumer anymore. You become a producer because you are now being paid as a resource to produce value or to deliver on some kind of set of outcomes, your job responsibilities, whatever service it is that organization is then selling for a profit. So the whole mindset is different. Now, the team that you work for, you are there for the purpose of causing them to be successful, and whatever service or product that you're creating, it needs to be released from the company and it needs to be profitable. And so I want to kind of like break this mindset down a little bit because again, it's shifting from having a thought of, okay, I get to determine what the experience is because I'm consuming it, more so now as a producer, since I'm having to contribute and bring something to the table, there's other people that get to kind of chime in on what that looks like.
Right. So I think to summarize, and then we'll dig into the examples, is this old mindset, and we're all about breaking mindsets. We've talked about that on the last podcast. So the old mindset, or maybe a current mindset, might be, I want it, and I want it now. And not only that, but I deserve it. I deserve this.
It's almost like a sense of entitlement that comes through.
Ooh, that dreaded word, entitlement. We don't like to hear. But the new mindset that we really want to dig into is you are a producer. So moving away, as Lorena was saying, from that consumption mindset to an awareness of how can I produce? How can I create? How can I bring forward something of value to those around me, including my organization?
Yeah. And as we were talking through this a little bit earlier, we want to identify, okay, the root of that consumer mindset is not just the culture we live in, but it's also the factor of having this kind of like entitlement thinking, like I deserve this because and this is some of my thinking when I first graduated from UT is I put in all this effort for my undergrad degree and I paid for it. So I deserve to have this kind of job. I mean, it was really like that thinking that I had that had to be broken down. And so Jamie and I were kind of spitballing this a little bit earlier, is like with entitlement thinking, like how can that actually get us in trouble?
Ooh. Yeah, it can get us in trouble in a few different ways. So I think thinking of it as not just this concept of mindset of like, oh, that's just how I think, looking at it in terms of how it's going to affect our future. So it can affect us relationally, for sure. And it could actually start to affect us in our finances.
Yeah.
So going back to what you were sharing about, we're in a consumer mindset every day, right? Things are getting thrown at us. And if we just start adopting that and keep that consumer mindset, then we're buying. Before we know it, we have debt we can't get out of. We're struggling financially. So that's one key of that entitlement thinking. And then another is relationally, just looking at things as I deserve it and I deserve this.
Or what
now,
can I get out of this relationship as opposed to what can we give into it?
What can I get out? What are you going to do for me? That's sort of how to explain it a different way. Like what is this going to mean for me? So we look at that from friendships, romantic relationships, groups we belong to. So before we know it, people really don't want to be around us. It's really harming those relationships that are paramount to the topic we talked about last week, and that's success and how to be a success.
Yeah. So in this, as we're kind of breaking this down, realizing, okay, it's a result of the culture that we're in that is so consumer focused. And it's also, the root of it is like a sense of entitlement. How can we shift from that thinking? How can we shift into a mindset of being a producer, being someone who comes and is like a self-starter and who adds value everywhere that they go, in people in the workplace, to relationships, either it be a romantic relationship or friendships. How can I add value in my church community? All these different areas. And some of the questions,
it always comes down to questions.
It always comes down to questions, the quality of questions we ask ourselves, right? So some of those that we were thinking about to shift into this mindset is, the first question is, how can I help? If you're constantly looking just to meet your own needs, you're going to still be kind of in the consumer thinking. But if you look outside of yourself and you're looking to see, okay, where are the needs around me? Does Jamie have something that she needs with her family? And is there something that I can give to help her rise? Like just having an awareness of thinking outside of ourselves and looking to the needs of those around us, and how can we meet those? What are some other questions, Jamie?
How can I contribute? That is huge. So you said, how can I help? What can I contribute is another great one. Really looking at, from a workplace perspective, we talked quite a bit about this just over lunch, and that's recognizing that I don't have to wait for someone to assign me something.
Yeah.
I can be proactive. And I think this goes back to childhood.
It does.
Some of us are taught, some of us are not. And whether you were or weren't, this is a great time to start learning. But, if you're taught from childhood that you're basically forced to have chores.
Sometimes it was like, no, I don't want to do this.
Yes.
But.
And I can't tell you how many times my mother told me to go back into her room and observe and determine what needed to happen. And I try to do that with my own son now. And it's something as simple as learning of, oh, okay, I've just left my clothes or shoes strewn about. Well, when you walk into a space and you recognize things and you're proactive in that, that is building character for the job, the workplace. So in the workplace example, it's taking notice. So, I know, Lorena, you were sharing in your first job, I experienced it too. It's like, well, I'm just going to assume that someone's going to assign me something. It's going back to that high school and college mentality. I don't have to do something until I'm told.
Or because someone has already mapped it out for me. Right. So I'm waiting to be told, okay, this is how you do your job successfully. But there's another way.
There's so many. Like the way to go about this, ladies, is to, especially if you're just starting out, you're not going to know what you're not going to know.
And that's okay.
Yes. And we have to be taught. But then it's taking that, embracing it, and asking for the next time. So an example would be, I've just started a new job. I've gotten trained on the 5 core things that fit within my responsibility. When I finish those, I'm proactively going to my manager, my supervisor, and saying, hey, I've finished these items. Is there another area of focus that I can go to that you can train me on? That I can just proactively do on my own and not have to wait for assignment.
Yeah, that's so good. And I know especially, and this is where, kind of taking that with a grain of salt as well, because if you're in an industry you've never been in before, or if this is your first full-time job, there should be a lot of grace, right? Like I know for me, my first full-time job was working in the dental industry, and I didn't go to school for that. And so like, I mean, I'm very much a self-starter. And so like when I would be trained in different things, I would, do those to the best of my ability. And I remember there was one day where I had brought a book with me, and I was reading my book because I'd finished everything that I was, that I knew to do. And this was so early on in my training, like a month or two in. And my manager came in and she's like, "Hey, like, do you need something to work on?" I was like, "Actually, yes, like I do." And so she showed me some things that I could be working on, just like in the back burner, like slowly chipping away at those. And one of the things that she told me I could do was that, I could run this report that brought out all of the different clients and patients of ours that had balances, and I could just call them and get them to pay their bills. Right. So continuing to add value for the company. And like I was saying, I was only there at that point, a month or two. And so I didn't know what I didn't know. Right. But once I was trained on that and I was taught, I knew those things to go back to and be like a self-starter to continue to add value to the organization as a whole.
Right. And I think, everyone has a different personality. We all come from different backgrounds. So it's just really the key of understanding. Well, I'm just going to say it. It all comes back to asking questions.
Yeah.
It's so key. And so one of the questions you can ask yourself is, am I being proactive in seeking out opportunities? Mm-hmm. Seeking out opportunities to be serving my manager, to be serving my team, to be seeking improvements in the environment around me, in process. Is there a new process I've noticed that needs to be implemented? And I'll just tell you, ladies, again, being in the workplace and in leadership for a very long time, there is not a good manager, I will say, a good leader that is ever going to say, "No, you can't work on that."
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If you're bringing an innovative new way, a new idea about a process or a way to organize the office or your team or clients or client appreciation or billing and infrastructure, leaders want to know. They don't have all the right answers just because they're in that leadership position. And I guarantee you that the moment you take that step, whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, it doesn't matter. If you just take the step and ask that question, what else could I be doing? Number one, or two, hey, I've noticed, fill in the blank.
Yeah.
I've noticed something that could improve. Your leader is going to embrace that and encourage that. So again, comes back to that question. Why don't you take a look this week and ask yourself, what am I doing to go that extra mile to identify those areas that I could really be helping?
Yeah, I just thought of a really good resource on that note before we keep moving on this topic. Yeah. It's called The First 90 Days. I forget the name of the author, but it's a really powerful book, especially for those women who are just starting in their first full-time jobs. Is it lists out what are some of the questions you should be asking your first 30 days, 60 days, and 90 days. What should you be asking of your peers, of your managers, and even like top like CEO, CFO, CMO of the company. Wow. And it's a great book. I went through a lot of those questions when I first started at Mighty Citizen, and it just gave me a whole a mindset of like, okay, like looking to the needs of those around me, looking to improve the company infrastructure, how communication flows, all of those things. So that's a really good resource that I definitely recommend reading.
I'm glad you brought that up, because from a leader perspective, we often outline that first 90 days. So it's sort of that we're outlining it for you. But from a company perspective, right? What's important to us as the company and that you produce for the company. Yeah. But I think you approaching it that way and encouraging all of us to think of it that way, that squashes this entitlement mentality.
It does. Yeah.
And so if we have any of that lingering in us, not a bad thing. It's just what we're used to, especially as we're new into our careers and in that transition into career. It gives us a different way to think about things, and that is going to look so good to your leader to come forward and say, I've been reading this book. Thank you for outlining your plan for my first 90 days. I've taken some notes and I've added to it.
That'll make you stand out and cause you to rise.
Yes.
So it was a good resource, I know, for me. So I hope that it can be for you too. So as we're talking through this, we talked about, again, being in a consumerism culture, that also being, having the root of entitlement and that old mindset, but now this new mindset of being a producer. What is at the core of that mindset of being a producer? Jamie touched on it earlier with, things that we learn in our childhood. And I think really what it comes down to is assuming responsibility. So when you're consuming something, there's no skin in the game. Like, you are just a recipient of whatever it is that you are paying for or receiving in some means of a transaction, right? But if you're a producer, you have to own the responsibility for whatever it is that you're creating to come forth, and to come forth in a way that it benefits and adds value to people around you. So I feel like that's at the core of this mindset of being a producer, being a self-starter, is realizing, oh my gosh, like, I actually have like this thing or this process or these group of people that I'm responsible for. I need to rise up and know how I'm going to lead and how I'm going to just offer strategy or any value that I can bring to the table with whatever it is I'm responsible for.
Right. And I love that you shared that, because in our last podcast, we were talking about, we define success as a particular title or pay, but on the title, you can start leading from day one.
Yep.
And if your desire is to be in leadership, whether that's at a company or to learn from a company and then start your own business, what a great way to get these foundational points and start having these experiences early on in your career to truly position you for leading others. Like, first, learn how to lead me.
Yeah.
Myself.
Yep.
Everything from my schedule, my daily schedule, my first 90 days, going and being proactive in my meetings with my management and my leadership and bringing forward ideas. That is leadership, and it will be recognized.
Yeah. And on that note, really it's like having the perspective of how can you make yourself an asset in the organization? How can you make yourself irreplaceable, really? Right. So if you spearhead a new process that didn't exist before, because let's say you've been there for 90 days or even 6 months at that point, and you're like, oh, I see a gap in this here. I want to come up with a solution and maybe get like a task force of 2 or 3 other people who are in, the same kind of role with me. And we can create a solution for this. That if you're a person who champions that and you add value to the organization, it's going to be really hard to replace you.
Right. That's so true. And I think one of the topics we were chatting about too was just this point of, you're really excelling and coming into that leadership mindset when you can watch others around you pass you up and be happy for them.
Yeah. And actually encourage them in it.
Encourage them. Yeah. Yes. And so I think one of the ideas that we've adopted at the organization I work with now, and that's to get out of this mindset of, I'm competing for a position against you. Versus I'm striving and working toward the level I would like to achieve for me.
Yeah.
I want to help encourage you in the level you want to achieve. There's room at the top for everyone.
It's good. You have to scrap for it.
You don't have to scrap for it. You don't have to, whatever we call it, backbiting or fighting for it. Yeah. It's really like, ladies, we can honestly encourage each other, fight for one another to really discover that purpose that we talked about, define what success looks like for us, and then start to produce toward that.
Yeah. And if we really believe that, that the ways that God has gifted us, like God will make room for those gifts, like Jamie's saying, there's room for everyone. Like even if the current organization you're at or you want to work for has a certain, organizational structure where you've got maybe only one or two people in a specific role that you aspire to be into, you never know. I mean, organizations change all the time.
All the time.
Let's say they land, 3 or 4 large accounts or clients and they have budget to expand certain areas of the company. You could be promoted in a few months. I mean, you never know what happens. And Jamie,
Right.
you were also mentioning one of your managers in one of your previous roles was telling you about the time factor.
Yes. So I can relate to early in my career, watching some people that hadn't even been at the organization. And this is a trap we can get into as well. I've been here for 5 years and they just hire someone off the street to be my manager. I'm sure some of you can relate. But I not only had that little inkling of that feeling, but then as the individual started and it was just a hard environment to be in. It was really difficult to just watch this unfold. And I would often admittedly complain to my manager. And I'll never forget, he just told me with a very calm, he had such a calm spirit. He still does. And just encouraging. He said, just give it time. Let it play out.
It's so simple.
There is absolutely nothing you can do by complaining or working against this person. Instead, come alongside, help, encourage, and just give it time.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll tell you, it wasn't 6 months and she had moved on because it ended up not being a fit for her or the organization. And, ways were parted amicably. But it's just that. Give it time. Instead of talking about someone, venting about it, there's absolutely nothing positive that's going to come out of that. Instead, look at what can I do to encourage, support, and what can I focus on creating for me? What are those things that I can create to help those around me for my role, looking for those opportunities and not being afraid to really bring those forward.
Yeah, Jamie, I love what you said about just about the factor of time, especially like us as younger women who have recently graduated from college. It's like we feel, whether it's conscious or subconscious, this pressure that we have to arrive by the time like we're 30, and be like a CEO at a company. Like, it's just not the truth. Like, it just takes time, and you have many experiences that culminate together into a, later on in life where it's more of like a big kind of revealing of some of the things that God has called us to do as women. And so I want to touch on that a little bit and then we can move on. But really the reality is it does take time. You can't just walk into an organization at like a mid-level or a senior level role if you just graduated from college. I know for me, I had that entitlement thinking. I was like, I got my degree in corporate communications from UT. Like I can like be a like mid-level manager. I'm going to apply for these jobs. And I didn't know what I didn't know. But, that's a big reason why like I wasn't even getting interviews for some of the roles that I was applying for, because they were roles that were just not entry-level roles. And so it's like just adjusting or level setting that thinking of like, okay, I cannot walk in and just like expect to run the organization if I've never even like had any experience of coming in low, proving how I can produce and add value. And then, with time and with the Lord's promotion, rising up in due time. So one of the things I want to share is I learned a lot in my first job, again, when I worked at the dental office in West Austin, where I was at, is this value of taking responsibility for, for producing in an organization, even in one where you may not like super like feel called to, but like that's where you're supposed to be, because your first job may not be your dream job, right? Something that the Lord really taught me in that season was that I remember him just whispering to me, Lorena, like if you can steward your boss's dream and what she's building with this dental practice, I'll then be able to trust you and give you your own dream. So sometimes you may be in a season where you like God is wanting to test the things in your heart so that your motives would be revealed and see, okay, if you're able to be faithful with someone else's dream that you may not even like care about. I mean, really, like,
Right.
but if you're faithful to be, to deliver with someone else's dream, like how much more can you be with something that like may be more related to your passion and your dream?
Right.
And so that's what I want to encourage everyone with is because a lot of us might be in jobs where it's not our dream that we're necessarily building, especially if we're younger in our careers, but you can learn so much with where you're at. You can add value. You can just be such an encouragement to the people around you and get experience for things that you want to pursue in the future. But really it's how can you steward someone else's dream? You have that responsibility to do it. You have the drive to add value no matter where you're at. But that's a big piece is if you can steward someone else's dream and what they're building, oftentimes God will be able to trust you with your own.
Right. And like you said, there's so many positive things you could be thinking through and enjoying early in that career. And that's just along the lines of what we've talked about today in this main segment. And that's just understanding how to lead yourself, how to run your schedule, how to look beyond yourself and being proactive and asking for additional things to work on, bringing forward new ideas. So there's so much you could learn in that first step that will truly carry you into your next career path, and ultimately on that dream job that we all strive for and look forward to.
Yep. It's good, Jamie. Yep. So now as we transition into the next part of our podcast, the health and hospitality section, I have such a passion for hospitality.
She does. I
do.
just have to brag. I mean, when we were talking about this, obviously still being stuck inside, I was like, you know what? There's no reason why we cannot treat ourselves.
Yes.
And Lorena does a great job at that and helping us to see how we can treat ourselves. So
yeah. So on that note, I really love charcuterie boards. I love just putting together, get some meat, some cheese, bread or crackers. And I'm actually dairy free. So there's so many options. If you're dairy free, if you're gluten free, if you have other, food allergies, you can pull it all together, add some fresh fruit in there, even some fresh veggies. Cause I like the color and just like you crunch into a green bean. It's like so good.
Making me hungry.
Yeah, I know. Adding in some dried fruit, some nuts of different kinds, and then any kind of like sweetness. So for me, it's dark chocolate. I always love to have dark chocolate. So obviously you can look at different ideas on Pinterest. We can share some as well. I might even share some pictures of my own. But some tips with building a charcuterie board. So a couple little hacks that I like to do. First, instead of having to like buy like a huge pack of salami, like you can go to the deli at, your local grocery store and you can sample different things and just be like, okay, I want this kind of salami or this kind of prosciutto. Like I just, want all these little things. And you can just get like, 3 or 4 slices of each one. And you can build out like 5 or 6 different meats like on your board. And it's not super expensive at all, which is really great. Another thing is there's all kinds of cheeses. Like again, if you're dairy free, vegan, like there's cheeses made with different alternative milks. I know for me, I can't do cow's milk, but I can do goat's milk and sheep's milk. So I get those kinds of cheeses and they're excellent. Couple other things, a lot of times you can pick out fresh baked loaves of bread and the ladies behind the counter will oftentimes be able to slice those for you. So it's like, that's the way to go. If you can get them like pre-sliced as opposed to like having to do it yourself. I mean, it's not bad, but and then do a mix of fruit and dried fruit to have different colors in there. And then don't forget the spreads. Put the hummus out, put the Nutella out or honey, like just have all the spreads. I know for me, one of my favorite things is actually, it's called za'atar. It's a Jewish kind of Middle Eastern based set of herbs and sesame seeds that you put in a bowl and then you drizzle olive oil and you can put a little bit of salt in there if you'd like, but you put it in a bowl and then you dip bread into it. It's so good. So try some za'atar. And then lastly, you can dress up your charcuterie board with fresh herbs. So I know for me, I love rosemary. You can put mint in there. You can do basil, cilantro, and then those are just nice kind of add-ons that make your board fresh.
Yeah, and don't forget the wine. If you like wine,
Yes, you want to do a little wine and cheese.
That. And I think the whole reason we're sharing this is last week we shared something on the fitness side. This week is on the entertaining and food side of hospitality. And there's no reason why we can't do that right here in our homes with ourselves. We could jump on a call to have a happy hour, a virtual happy hour, and brag about our own charcuterie board. Or join in with our family. So ladies, treat yourself this week. I know I have a plan to make my very own. So I'm very excited about that. All right. Thank you, Lorena, for sharing that and just the passion that you have behind making sure that we take care of ourselves.
Absolutely.
All right. So our next segment is what women want to know. And so we had a question come in this week from Abby, and she asks, I often feel alone on my journey and figuring out my purpose. What are a few ways I can get someone to help me figure this out? Oh my gosh, don't we all struggle with this? Lorena, I'm going to let you tackle this one first. What are your thoughts for Abby?
Well, I will say that feeling alone, number one, is not it's not a bad thing to feel that initially. Now, if you stay there and that loneliness kind of sinks in and there's no response of being proactive to remove that loneliness, that's a problem. But to be alone is not like bad in itself. But I would say if you're feeling alone, do a quick little assessment. Like, who are the closest relationships that you can pull on that are speaking into your life and that are reminding you of who you are and the incredible woman that you're rising into becoming. And that's super key, especially as you're figuring out your purpose, as you're transitioning, whether it be from high school into college or college into the marketplace. Like, it's a journey that has many twists and turns. And so to really have that strong support network filled with family and friends and mentors, that's so key.
Yeah. And I think just having that conversation, so even with your best friend or maybe a mentor from your women's group or even at work, it's really just talking that out. Like, hey, let's grab a virtual coffee right now.
Yeah.
But I want to find out what my purpose is. Let's just sit and talk about it. So that's where you could really help each other by asking the question, what are you passionate about? What is something in the world that you see that you wish you could change? Like those two questions alone are huge.
Yeah.
And then that accountability buddy, I think is really important. I know I have a few. Lorena is definitely one. And they're of all ages. So sharing then, like, this is what I'm really passionate about. But also having someone to say, okay, what are you going to do about it?
Yeah.
What are you going to create?
Yeah. And I think on that note of having someone to hold you accountable, we'll talk more about this in another episode, but the value of mentoring, like that word I feel like is not widely used in our culture because really for a lot of women to seek out mentors, it kind of feels foreign to a lot of us. I feel like that's actually a huge passion of mine is I've sought out mentors for all different kinds of things in my life since I was a little girl, since I was like 10. But essentially like choosing to identify someone who's older than you, in a different life stage who can give you perspective beyond where you're at and to also just encourage you and help you cast vision for where you want to go is huge. And so seeking out a mentor even in this time can be super helpful.
That's so great. And I know from my perspective, I was always afraid to ask for one because I thought if I asked for help in any way, it just meant that I was failing or didn't have the ability to figure it out on my own. Well, we need to just squash that. Yeah. Right. So ladies, reach out. Abby, thank you for the question. We appreciate it. We've all been there. You're not alone in it. And use our community. This is a great segue into closing our podcast today. This wraps it up for this week. Thanks for joining us. But use the community, right? That's what we are here for. The Zveda community online at our website, zveda.com. Join us on Facebook, join us on Instagram, And let's talk, ladies. Just keep the questions coming and let's be the support network that we all need. Thanks again. We'll talk to you next week. Thanks for listening to the Zveda podcast. Keep your questions coming so we can rise together. Visit Zveda.com to talk to us and join our community. That's Zveda.com. We'll see you next week.